Hi, this is Paul, and today Joey has been on one of our videos before. Joey came to our second Sacramento Jordan Peterson Meetup, and I've been bugging some of these guys at the local meetup to come on the channel sometimes. And I had James on a while ago, but I've wanted to have Joey on for quite a while. So Joey, I'm really glad that you could come. And why don't we just begin by having you introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. So yeah, like you said, I've been coming to the meetup group right now for about a year and a half. It's been super enjoyable. It's literally, I have never done anything like it in my whole life. I've had some philosophy classes in college where occasionally one class out of maybe 10, you'd get a decent conversation going. But ours consistently, every single time we go, it's like you'll have at least 2 or 3 good 20-minute sections that are just like blowing your mind, making you think about things differently. So it's been a lot of fun. My background is very, very standard as far as most things go. So I'm from the Midwest. I'm from Chicago specifically. I grew up in the suburbs. Very, very, my family used to joke around that we were the Cleavers from Leave It to Beaver because we didn't really have any major problems. We didn't really have any like major issues or things like that. No arrests, no divorces, no not like it was a very, very standard kind of boring upbringing.
Bad thing.
When I was super young, the suburb was relatively less developed, so there was lots of places outside to go and explore. There were big not forest preserves, but there was just big open land with forests that me and my friends would run around in. You know, when you're a little kid, you don't really need that much to feel like a lot. But as we got older, everything around us got developed and turned into houses and McMansions and things like that. And so the area got more and more boring as we got older and older. So then my high school years were incredibly dry. I was a pretty bright kid. I didn't challenge myself academically probably as much as I should, but I didn't really have a ton of opportunities to do so either, at least in my own estimation. There's part of that's your parents kind of have to set you up for that. You kind of have to and they have to know about it. And my parents are both very well put together, very successful people. My dad, one of the hardest workers I've ever seen, probably the hardest worker I've ever seen. My mom's great too, but they didn't go to college, so they didn't know how the system works and how you need to go in and out and control your destiny. Like the public school system just doesn't really have the best interests in mind for you. So that's kind of where I ended up. I hated high school because I was so bored, just daydreaming all day long, every day. And then I would go home and at night I would have recurring dreams of a full school day that had nothing interesting happen in it. I would get stuck in this loop where my school week would end up being like 9 days long effectively. And it was horrible. And so, yeah, I was so disappointed with the whole school system, disappointed with school in general that essentially I was going to college planning on dropping out. My mom got cancer right before I left for college. So that was another thing. So I didn't want to go too far away. It was a good prognosis. We didn't think there was going to be any complications, but you never know. So it was one of those things. I didn't want to spend too much on college. I didn't want to go too far away. And I didn't want to overinvest myself into it because I thought, well, I'll be here for a year because my parents are more or less pushing me into it. And then I'll drop out afterwards. Got to college, was pleasantly surprised. Made one really good friend right off the bat.
Where did you go to college?
University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. It's a small school in the southeast side of Wisconsin. It's about 110 miles or so from Chicago proper. So it was an hour and a half drive from my house. It was really, really close by. They gave me a good scholarship because I had really high test scores. The school had really low test scores. So I got in pretty easily, and then they wanted to keep me around. So that worked out really well. Got to go to college for super cheap, essentially. Made one really good friend early on. He only stayed for a year, but it kind of changed my whole perspective on how friends work and how you need to form social groups. And that was maybe the start of my journey in figuring out how I wanted to be as an adult, which I guess is what you're supposed to do in college. So To that end, it was good. The education, again, it wasn't a great school. I wasn't challenging myself nearly enough, so I didn't get the best of my education. But then coming out of that school, because I was in the honor society, and I was in the honor society, they asked me to join, and I just clicked a checkbox that said yes. I was in the honor society. I got recruited through that honor society to join a software company. The software company's name was Epic. It was in Madison, Wisconsin. They were doing healthcare software. And so I graduated in 2009 during the middle of the Great Recession. All of my friends were having really tough time getting jobs, really tough time getting good jobs. And this one essentially just fell into my lap. I started work on a day that I was planning on moving down to Florida and just figuring shit out down there. But like instead I started at the software company. It was a good job. It was challenging. I spent a lot of time working. My weeks were incredibly long. I said yes to a lot of things that I probably should have been smarter about. I overcommitted. By the end, I think in the last month, I worked, it was something like, including travel time. And so some of the travel time I'm sleeping, but it's not real sleep. I think I worked something like 150, 90, 120, and 130 hours. Oh. I mean, that's including travel time. So, but that's a lot of work. That was a lot of work. Then I came back and I had a boss who was like, you know, she was 2 years older than I was or something. So we were all just babies pretending to be consultants. And I missed one meeting that I had told another manager that I wasn't going to be able to make because I was working these crazy hours and I was going to be in another meeting. And some email got exchanged or something, and I just got chewed out for like half an hour, and I just kind of walked away. And I'm like, I'm done with this. And so I did. Got convinced by my cousin-in-law to move out to Santa Barbara for a sales job, which it was actually a decent company. It was a smaller company. There was some real opportunity there. So it wasn't I got suckered into it. It was a real sales job. I was just too young and I didn't know the product. I didn't really have any interest in the product and I didn't do very well. So about a year into that, they asked me to move to the warehouse, because I had a degree in operations management. It actually would have been a great fit for me. The company was just too small to really even support an entire person back there. So I hopped on LinkedIn. I started looking around. I had been getting emails for people wanting me to do Epic work. And I'm like, never again, never again, never again. I started talking to some people and I had job offers for 4 times what I was making at the software company and 5 times what I was making at the sales job within the first week. The interviews lasted less than 15 minutes. Like it was height of Obamacare. They just needed bodies in the seats and you couldn't do the job without the certification I had. So it was a little bit like an oil boom type situation. Ended up doing some consulting work. My first job was for a hospital in North Carolina. It went really well. We got a few things done. Then a project got delayed and they didn't really have anything for me to do. So I just didn't renew. It was shaking hands, all good exits, stuff like that. Then I ended up at Sutter Health, worked there for about 2 years. That was a great project. Loved the people I worked with, a lot of good times. Lived here was flying up from Santa Monica for a while. Then I ended up moving here full time.
Here meaning Sacramento.
Here meaning Sacramento. Made a ton of really good friends, just like an incredible number of friends. We've talked about that at the meetup group several times. Maybe we'll talk about it more later, but I tried moving back to Chicago a few times and it just didn't take. It's like, no, I can't do this. I can't leave my friends. And so now I've just got such a good non-familial social group that my mom came out recently and met some of my friends and she told me, you can't come home. You have to stay here. So now I'm staying here. I had been doing the consulting thing on and off, taking little breaks in between gigs. Now this last time I ended work in June 2018. So it's been a year and a month. And I told myself I was going to do some cool new stuff and I was going to take a proper sabbatical and not just take time off. And part of it's been this Jordan Peterson group. Part of it's been trying to invest in figuring out in what exactly is going on here is the whole catchphrase, figuring out what we're doing, figuring out if there's a way to scale it, figuring out if there's a way to make a non-exploitative living off of it. You know, if I can help people and have a job out of it, that would be great. I don't know if that's going to be possible. Figuring out what I want to do on my own, because I think at some point I need to run my own show. I don't think I'm the employee type forever. I just think I would feel the lack of freedom. So I'm trying to figure that out. And then the super cool thing that I've been doing is I've been trying to get into a sport called highlining, which is slacklining, but it's in between cliff faces. So anywhere, yeah. So, you know, it's just the kind of thing you just happen to get into. But it's essentially a 1-inch thick wide webbing. They call it a webbing. It's kind of like a ratchet type material from a ratchet strap. It's about 1 inch wide. It's 50 to 500 feet off the ground, even high, you know, whatever you can put it in between. And they'll be anywhere from about 20 meters to, I think the world record right now is 1,080 meters long. I might be way off on that, but like it's, wow. So some of these are just really cool projects that people are doing. I'm not there yet. I haven't walked on the line yet because it's incredibly hard. Been doing a lot of training in the gym, been getting a lot of the moves in the gym. And then now it's become a weekly thing too. Right after I'm done talking to you, I'm going to head out to the park, and we'll get 12 to 15 people that show up to this little event. We've got lines of all different sizes, all different lengths, difficulties. And then people just hang out in the park and practice their slacklining, and they do some yoga, and they do some acro yoga, and they do all this other fun hippie stuff that I never thought I'd never heard of in the Midwest. And yeah, and that's where I'm at now. And yeah, I don't really know where to go from there. So
all right. Well, you live in an area of, now people in Sacramento will know this, but nobody else will know anything about it. You live in an area of Sacramento called Midtown.
Yeah.
And Midtown is sort of the place in Sacramento where a lot of men and women your age who are single tend to live. In fact, my son, who comes to our meetup, will be moving to Midtown this month. And sometimes when I go to Midtown, because we have a church plant that's in Midtown, sometimes when I go to Midtown and I walk around, I think this is sort of like college with jobs instead of classes.
Pretty much.
And so was that part of how, I mean, you found that peer group when you moved to Sacramento? And
yeah, it's a lot of people that would be derogatorily called yuppies. It's young professionals. It's a lot of college educated people. It's probably very similar to Washington, D.C., even though I've never been there, because of the government focus. So it's young people who aren't making an extraordinary amount of money, but are making decent livings and are secure within their financial situations. So I think the culture is a little bit different, because we don't have like San Francisco or New York type vibes where there's some people making millions of dollars and throwing money around, and then there's other people making no money. And like, I've been in those cities. There's a different vibe to everything. There's a lot more outward cultural signaling from just different groups. Like the way you dress is way more distinct in those cities. I feel the way you act and talk and people you hang out with, it's all like way more, even though it's subconscious, it's way more planned. Mm-hmm. Where Sacramento, I think it's a lot more of the ideal, what you were talking about, college experience. It's a lot more of the ideal, people, actually diverse people coming together and interacting politely. You don't always agree. You don't always do any of that stuff, but it's very strange for a California city, and I've lived in a few. So
okay. Now, were you raised with religion growing up? Did your parents go to church?
So my parents were both raised with religion. I wasn't. The Catholic Church scandal hit my mom really hard. She doesn't really like talking about it, so I don't know the details, but like, the hypocrisy was always a very big issue for my mom. So she didn't like the hypocrisy aspects of the church. So she just wasn't a very big fan. My dad, I think, went to Catholic high school, went to Lutheran churches, but then a Catholic high school just because it was the neighborhood in Chicago, because they both grew up in Chicago. They were Chicago born and raised. So that was kind of their background. And then as they got older, I don't think they attended church very often, if at all. My grandparents, who we saw the most, stopped going to church. So like then my parents did too. I didn't even find out I was baptized until I was about 16 years old. I was going through, like, you have your drawer. Every kid in the family has one drawer, and you go through that drawer, and there's all the different stuff and documents and stuff. And I'm going through it when I'm 16, and I come across a baptism certificate, and I can't remember where did this come from. I didn't read this, and my dad was yelling back, not yelling, but we were just joking around. He's like, "If you go to hell, it's not my fault." And I'm just like, "All right, fair enough." So we got a good laugh out of it, but it was just like, so I'd say my dad leans more towards agnostic. My mom leans more towards, I would say, like, non-believer.
Okay.
Like, she sees the church as more of an institution than the religious aspects of it.
Okay. Now, somewhere along the line, you discovered Sam Harris. When did you first learn about Sam Harris, and what were your impressions?
So I think that goes back to that philosophy class I took. So I graduated high school early because I hated it so much. But my mom said I had to take 2 community college classes while I was working at Best Buy, which was the right decision, and Best Buy was not enough. No offense to anyone who works there. I was working in the warehouse. I was just putting in hours, and I was trading hours for a little bit of money. And I didn't even need the money. So it made it way worse because I would have paychecks stack up at the front. I would get 4 of my paychecks from 8 weeks at the same time. And the people who worked there, like, didn't know why I wasn't collecting my paychecks. I didn't have any hobbies. I didn't spend any money anyhow. So during that class, I took that philosophy class at a community college, and it was actually really cool because the philosophy teacher I had, despite it being a philosophy class, was a young Earth creationist. So and he was very polite about it, and he was very, like, into the rules of arguing with philosophy. He wasn't like the most. He didn't have, like, the greatest background. Like, he didn't have encyclopedic knowledge of much. But he liked the rules, he liked the game, and he liked the core principles of what you teach in a Philosophy 101 class. So he was actually a great person to go back and forth with. Through him, I discovered Christopher Dawkins, who I just loved Christopher Hitchens, who I just loved his sense of humor too much. Because he had a little bit of that troll, a little bit of that too smart for his own good, a little bit of I'm going to poke and cause trouble, but you can't get that mad at me because I didn't say anything that bad. And that's my personality. So I really fell in love with some of, like, his YouTube videos and stuff. That was maybe back in 2005. I don't know. Yeah, maybe it wasn't even YouTube videos. Maybe it was other stuff because I don't even know if YouTube was around back then. Found Sam Harris through him. I'm a big fan of a lot of Sam Harris, especially his stuff 2015 and before. He was very big, I think, in, like, the post 9/11 stuff. I think his work on Islam was very critical in the right ways, and it was very critical not just of the religion itself, but of the people who refused to look at it to be critical of it. And I think that work was very important. I think he got a lot of conversations going.
Why do you think you were attracted to these, what Jordan Peterson would call celebrity atheists?
So in the Midwest, outside of Chicago has a very global feel. It's like any other big city, but the suburbs are very Midwest culture. Midwest culture is nice but pushy. So in the my experience of the Midwest is everyone wants to ask you questions, not just to be nice, not because they're interested, but because they want to know what you're doing. So, you would get a lot of the Christian type folk, and it was a lot of the evangelical type folk were the most outgoing about it. So it was probably inversely related to how much they cared about actually talking about it, and how much they cared about pushing their religion on you was inversely related to how much they were actually willing to have a conversation. Mm-hmm. And like I said, I was a pretty bright kid at a young age. Like, you weren't gonna convince me of anything by telling me. You were gonna have to convince me. So I had a lot of people be pushy in my life, trying to tell me to do this, that, or the other, and their arguments to my even as a very, very young child were inadequate, and so I pushed back against it. And so then when I found people who are really good at pushing back against that specific type of argument, I was very attracted to them.
So how, somewhere along the way, I mean, you made your way to a Jordan Peterson meetup, which meant that you found Jordan Peterson. How did you find Jordan Peterson? What grabbed your attention? Why did you decide to come to a meetup in a church of all places?
Well, I found Jordan Peterson first. And I found him probably through some of the comedians that were on YouTube, probably through that whole Twitter atmosphere that, that jokes around a lot. And then whenever something blows up on campus, they're all over it. So there's the famous Red Suspender video. And I've always been a big Orwell fan. As far as authors go, I've read the most Orwell. I don't even really like reading books. I feel like my theory on reading books, I think kind of said this in the last video, but my theory on reading books is I don't like giving my mind away to another person for that long of a time uninterrupted. I prefer articles. I prefer even just Twitter arguments or Twitter threads because they're shorter, more compact. And then I get to deal with the argument as opposed to a narrative that's trying to convince me of something. But Orwell, I really, really like. And when Jordan Peterson went out there, and when he had people screaming at him and he's, just standing there wearing the red suspenders and talking back about how free speech is my most important value. I think it's the most important American value. I think that's why it's the First Amendment. I think it's incredibly vital to our society, incredibly vital to our culture. And when he would stand there in front of everyone and not back down and speak to the crowd, even though there was a reasonable chance that not only could the crowd have violently consumed him? Like, let's say I'm overemphasizing that. Let's say that wasn't really a possibility. It feels like it at the time when you have that many people yelling at you. Stood up to that. Stood up to all of the other consequences that could have come his way. Said that if they were going to fine him, he wasn't going to pay it. If they sent him to jail, he was going to go on a hunger strike, and he just wasn't going to do this. And he wasn't going to do this for free speech, or more specifically against compelled speech. And that's the kind of person that even if I don't agree with them, I have to respect them. So that's where he came on the board for me. After that, I found the rest of his videos, and I mean, they're enthralling. So that's just kind of where I went from there.
Okay. And I'd actually met some of your friends because I started making videos. Yep. And then people started reaching out to me. I had lunch with Taylor, whose water bottle I used as an illustration.
It's still downstairs. It's still in my house. You gave it to him, and I still haven't done it. Yeah, you had lunch with him. He convinced me to come and do it. And
I think he only came to one.
He did. Yeah, he came with his I think it was his roommate at the time, who's still good, Matt, one of our other good friends. I think the two of them went. Then they convinced me to go. No, he came to two because he went to one without me, and then he went to one with me. And Matt didn't come to the second one. And neither one of them has been back since.
No.
It's more about timing than anything else. But
I don't take it personally.
Yeah. So they convinced me. They're both churchgoers. They're both very, very good people I respect very much, both for their opinions and just as who they are as human beings. And so he's like, you need to come to this. You'll enjoy it. We were talking about Jordan Peterson a lot outside of that. We talk about Joe Rogan a lot too. So it was like that kind of sphere of what we were talking about. He convinced me to come. That was literally the first time I had ever been in a church besides weddings and funerals or the baptism that I didn't know about. So, yeah, I was very nervous about that. Like, one of the things that a lot of us have said about holding the Jordan Peterson meetup in a church is there's the inherent importance of it. Even if holiness might be too strong of a word, but it's like, this is important. This is an important place to be. People come here to listen to important things and do things that, I don't know, just like that means something. So there's an inherent level of respect. We have fun, but we're trying to be serious about it while having fun. And just, it ends up being a very, very healthy environment for the kinds of discussions that we're having, I think.
So you talked a little bit about this already, but what did you find that, I mean, obviously it's gripped you in a pretty significant way. You've been to pretty much, unless you had a scheduling conflict, you've pretty much been to every meeting, and you very quickly became, we don't really have a formal structure within our group, but there are those who kind of represent the core of the group who have taken on much more leadership in terms of activities and deciding topics. So what about this do you think really grabbed you, and what role is it playing in your life?
I mean, so part of it's the camaraderie. I never played any sports. I always had lots of friends growing up, but it was always like, okay, I would have one best friend at a time and then friends. They were all good people. I would still be friendly with all of them, even the ones I don't talk to very much. But I never really had the we're in this together kind of feel. If we would go out for a night, I could trust my friends to back me up if some trouble had happened. But if I was one town over and they got a call, well, they would be like, oh, well, is the ambulance coming? That's great. It's like, maybe I'm selling them short too, but that's kind of what it felt like. We didn't really have the like serious camaraderie that I think this group has, that we're going to do stuff together. That like when one of us is having trouble, like they reach out to the other people and we talk to each other. Like we talk through things as opposed to just trying to come up with quick solutions to things. I think that's a very Midwest thing as well, is like, oh, if you have a problem, well, here's how I would solve it. And that's the end of the conversation. But like, you don't explore the problem anymore. So you don't even have the words to describe your problems very well. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is just, it's very mentally challenging. It's very interesting to talk about. Working in the IT world, I encountered a lot of hard problems, but none of them were like, ooh, that's super fascinating. Like I'm really enjoying exploring this area of my mind. Like it was more mathish problems. So now trying to actually talk about stuff in depth, with archetypes, in a narrative, in a story, just like that whole thing just kind of layers things on top of each other. So it's very cool.
Have your opinions about religion changed at all in this process?
So I mean, before I was probably openly disrespectful of it. I was openly disrespectful of religion in the way that I felt attacked by it. I felt that people who were wearing their religion outwardly forward were trying to impose it on me. Were trying to control my behavior. Were trying to claim authority that I didn't think they have, because they're claiming authority from above that I didn't believe in. So when you try and claim that doesn't make sense to me. So that seems tyrannical to a person that's only encountering the middle school boy evangelical version of religion. Jordan Peterson's famously used that against Sam Harris, is that Sam Harris has a middle school atheist opinion. But I think that most of the people that atheists come into contact with, that will actually try and change their mind as atheists, come into contact with people who have middle school opinions of religion. So watching your channel, talking to some of the believers in our group, actually discussing things without getting offended, actually like not just trying to, I think we were joking about not just trying to slam dunk on each other and, come up with these verbal quips because we have 3 hours. It's way more fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what the groups made me feel. Jordan Peterson, even before I came to the group, the way he describes history, the way he describes psychology, the way he describes narrative structures and archetypes and things like that, which I didn't even really use the word archetype before I heard of Jordan Peterson. So the way he puts all of those things together, and he uses music a lot too. The way he constructs a symphony when he's talking to people about it has intrinsic meaning. Like there's something there that's so important. And I think he was talking to Harvard or Stanford. And he was like saying that like, if you kids are so privileged and so smart that if you learn how to use your words properly and how to construct arguments in a way that makes sense and how to tug emotions, not abuse them, but use them appropriately and string things together and use facts as well. So don't abuse statistics, don't abuse facts, don't abuse emotions. Put all that together. You get something that is so enjoyable and so beautiful and impossible to look away from. And you become so much more powerful within your own mode of being. You're not just riding along with life, because people might pick this up from the story I told, maybe they won't, but I felt like I was railroaded. Like my life just kind of happened to me. I wasn't doing it. Jordan Peterson convinced me I needed to flip it around. It's like, I'm smart enough. I'm like, this is true of most people, but maybe not all people, but like, I'm definitely feel that I'm personally smart enough. I'm personally creative enough. I'm personally interesting enough that I need to take control of my own life, and I need to push it forward. So that's where the sabbatical came from. That's where the I'm changing my life came from. That's where my involvement with this group comes from. And when you put all that together, one of the important things that's in that sympathy is culture. And modern public school education, especially what we're dealing now with social justice, it's just like become so explicit now, is people that look like me and have my genitals don't have a culture. And that's just, A, it's not true. It's factually untrue. Everyone has a culture. And B, my culture is just as important as anyone else's. And I've never explored it before. I've never really looked at it. I've read ancient Roman history books, but that might be a little bit too far back. Maybe instead of these ancient books, I need to read some more books from the 1800s, from the 1700s. I need to diversify my own understanding of my own culture and my own history, and it's important. Now, when you take it with religion, because that was the original question that I've gone in a huge circle around, sorry. Okay. But when you take that with religion, okay, maybe religion is a little bit more than that middle school evangelical version that was getting pitched to me. Maybe religion is groups of people coming together to talk about important things, to hear about important things, to support each other, to be there for each other, to form something a little bit bigger than a family and a little bit smaller than a tribe. And maybe that's super, super important. Yeah. So I was laughing at religion. Like, this is the line I've used again and again in our meetup group. I used to laugh at religion. I'm not laughing anymore. I'm taking it very seriously.
Now you talked about you're taking a sabbatical. You've been doing some things that you never thought you'd do before. You're living in kind of a sweet place to explore, because there's a tremendous diversity of people in Midtown and from really all over the world. Yep. And they're, like you say, you don't have billionaires. So most people to afford a place in Midtown, you've got to be, doing okay. Most of them
but not over the top. It's
right. Now you've taken a sabbatical and you're doing some exploring. And in the video that we did before, when we had the 5 of us, you've kind of got a vision for, for starting other meetups. And I know because, some of the other events that we've gone to, you've come along, and this coming Sunday, I should probably mention that I should probably make a different video, but this coming Sunday will help the Alameda, the new Alameda meetup start in the Bay Area. And so what's kind of behind that? Because that's an interesting move for, especially one of the things that I caught my attention when we're making the other videos, when you were saying, well, if you're just kind of a person out there and you want to meet up and you can't really start one, find a pastor and talk to them. And I thought, oh my, I don't know how that will go.
Bold. Got to be bold.
Got to be bold. That is bold.
So, I guess I was talking to James. So James has been on the show before. He's the
it's a beard.
Psychology? No, philosophy professor.
Psychology. Neuropsychology.
No, that's his degree. I think he's the philosophy professor at whatever. He's a professor at a local college.
Yeah.
And we were talking in one of the meetings, like in public. So we were having this kind of back and forth in front of people, and we got to the conclusion that if this group is so great for us and it means so much to us, aren't we obligated to share it with other people? And the answer we both came to was reluctantly, yeah, we kind of need to. So we've been trying to figure that out. I'm disappointed in myself with how fast that's gone. Part of the sabbatical was my health wasn't in great shape before I went on it, so I've been focusing on that. I need to be in tip-top shape to do the highlining thing that I was going to do, because you don't just walk on those if you're some guy. I have lost about 20 pounds. I have been getting in shape. I've just been feeling a lot healthier. I've been getting my diet under control. Ironically, the Jordan Peterson, kind of the carnivore thing, just made me rethink my diet a little bit too, which is a whole nother story that some people have different opinions about. But yeah, so then, I mean, the next thing is how do we expand this? How do we take this magic that we have in our group that forms these bonds, that does these things, and how do we spread it out? And how do we do it in a way that is sustainable? Because I can't devote 40 to 50 hours of my own time towards this project and then try and go back to work where I'm going to work 60 or 70 hours a week. I've done that before. It literally kills you. You can't work. Some people can work that hard. I'm not one of them. So we've started some websites. We don't have much functionality on them. I'm not even going to share them yet. We'll share them at a future date. But we've got the domain names. We're coming up with some ideas. I've been working very hard. I've been working very hard on my personal social commitments. So one of the things I do that's very beneficial is I do a happy hour every 2 weeks. Our friend group does lots of events like this where we have stuff that happens sporadically but dependably, so that every other Friday an invite goes out to 70 or 80 of my closest friends, and 20 of them show up. And then they show up every other Friday, and they know that they have somewhere to go and somewhere to be with people who care about them. Some of my other friends do, we call it Framly. So friends and family dinner every single Sunday. Every single Sunday that they're in town, they host dinner. Everyone's welcome. Anyone you vouch for is welcome to come. It's amazing. It's amazing. Like, it's why my mom says I can't come back home. I have to stay here. So
it's a big thing for a mom to say.
So like so that's my own experience. I've invited some members of our Jordan Peterson meetup to join me in those events. They have done it. It's been great. I've been hosting my own smaller discussion groups on the side in my own house. Those have been fun too. It has some overlap. Some of my other friends, some of my Jordan Peterson friends. But it's now like, okay, I'm so blessed to use that term, so privileged to use the other term in this aspect of my life. How do I share it with people? And yeah, I'm very much struggling in figuring out how that scales. And I guess now we're going to be talking to over 1,000 people. I'm welcome to hear their inputs, and I will ignore most of them, but I will listen to some of them.
There won't be 1,000 comments.
No, there won't be 1,000 comments, but there'll be 2 or 3.
Yeah, well, there'll be more than 2 or 3.
There'll be 2 or 3 that I want to listen to.
Well, so part of, so I've been re-listening to some of the biblical series again, and, part of figuring out why Jordan Peterson has had the impact that he has had and the splash that he's had, one of the points he makes again and again is you need to have a goal. And, that what that goal does is begins to orient you, and it gives you a direction. So if you already mentioned how, you want to help others have, and I think help others have the kind of meetings that we're having. And I think probably with some of the trips that we've taken and some of the other groups, you're appreciating how special our group in Sacramento is, and how complicated it really is to get a good meetup going. It's, there's certainly methodology,
mm-hmm.
but there's also always something of, there were certain elements of our group that are really hard to reproduce because, of course, I was making videos and that gave a certain critical mass
mm-hmm.
to at least initial people. I think we got really good very early on sort of having the right people with the right mix. And we very quickly, I think, established a very healthy culture that has facilitated what we've got going. That doesn't happen everywhere or every time, but you've seen how, so you're saying, okay, you've got this career that obviously you could jump back into, but you don't want to jump back in like you had been before. The sabbatical has to change you in a way so that when you go back,
I need to maintain my physical health and my mental health when I go back. Which I was holding on to my mental health okay in my job, not great. But now my physical health and my mental health is literally the best it's ever been in my entire life. I know it's not going to stay that way when I start working, but I'd like to get close to that optimized.
Yeah. Well, what do you see? I mean, because part of what I've really appreciated about the group and about you in particular, along with some others, as a pastor of a small church, a mostly aging church, the community that I'm most aware of and the issues that surround the people I work with most often tend to be issues of retirees in Sacramento, from various ethnic groups, various socioeconomic classes. But one of the things that I've really appreciated about the group is that I've learned a lot about the challenges that, you're a little bit older than my kids, but I've learned a lot about the challenges that your generation is facing, and challenges in terms of questions of finding marriage, finding a mate, questions of career. One of the things that every time I come away from a meetup and I listen to many of you talk, I just hear how much the world has changed since I was your age.
And it's going faster. It's not slowing down.
So what are you learning, and what are some of the, maybe some top takeaways that you've seen in this, and maybe some of the things that you've now had some perspective on because of your sabbatical and because of the life that you've lived for the last year or two in Midtown?
So I actually probably learned a lot more from my consulting gig, because my consulting work was so strange for somebody my own age. Most people, even who get into consulting, will end up consulting and then working for one firm for a set amount of time before moving on to one other firm that they work for a set amount of time. My work was all 6 months to 2 years, and I spent the majority of that time not working for a specific firm, but working as a supplemental employee in the hospital that I was working at. So when I'm talking about cultures, and when I'm talking about like religious culture specifically, that's specific to your local non-work culture. But in terms of work cultures, I've seen hundreds, because even within those jobs, my specific role was I was helping with front desk software for hospitals and clinics. So I would go not just to a hospital, not just to an IT room, but I would go to a region that I had never been to, then go to a sub-region that I had never been to, and then go to the front desk clinic, and then work with somebody who works at a front desk in a clinic. And again, this is not disparaging them at all, but they are a different sort of person than the person that most people who are in consulting would work with. At the same time, since I started college, I've moved over 40 times.
Wow.
Exactly 40 times. So this current apartment I'm in is the first place I've stayed in for more than a year since I left home the first time.
How many years has that been? 10 years? 12?
Yeah, 12 now, but this was still true. This was true when I hit 29. So in 10 years, I moved an average of about 4 times a year.
Wow.
It's nuts. And some of that was, move back home, stuff like that, but it's picking up all your stuff, leaving what you had behind and being somewhere new. So I was completely rootless. And I think that's what our generation's feeling is our generation's feet are being taken right out from under them. Everyone's being encouraged to go. If you're above average intelligence, if half the kids are going to college, by default, you're getting down to people who are of average intelligence are still being taken away from their homes, going to college somewhere else, having a new experience, which is not a bad thing, but it is a thing. and their roots are being taken away. Then when they're done with college, they don't want to go back to their own town that, like I was saying, has nothing for them to do. They want to go to a big city that has stuff to do and people to see. So now you have all of these displaced kids with a ton of debt, no friends because they moved away, like no family because their family's back in their old town. What are all of these people supposed to do? Well, they drink. That's what they do. They drink, they go on Tinder, they join co-ed sports leagues with just a random assortment of people that they have some things in common with, but not very much. They maybe make 4 or 5 good friends. I'd say that's average for somebody my age, is when they look around in their local community, they have 4 or 5 good friends. Some of them have none. Some of them have just the people they work with. Some of them are very, very fortunate like me, and they have 50 of them. That's fantastic. How do I get more people to go from 0 to 5 or from 5 to 50? Because every time you're becoming a friend with somebody, they're becoming friends with you too. So they get an extra friend, you get an extra friend, everyone wins. But it doesn't work if you don't have anything underneath it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, wow, this is that, and of course the group of people you are describing are actually the successful people.
Yeah.
We're not talking about the person who maybe went to community college and didn't make it, so remains living at home. This is sort of the mythic person living in their mother's basement covered with Cheeto dust playing computer games.
Yep. Who may also have a successful job, but they're just home.
Yeah. But to me, this is a radical transformation from what so I graduated Calvin College in 1986. The expectation for me was, by that point, you're hopefully, ideally you found a mate, or at least are working hard on that. And within the next 5 years, you will find a mate, get married, begin to settle into a career, purchase a home, begin having children. That is a wholly different thing than you are describing.
Pretty much.
And what's interesting to me about that is that obviously, if in the narrative that I lived, you start to do those things in your 20s, then by your 50s, where I'm at, well, then the kids have grown, they've gone to school, they're going to college or have gone to college. And so in a sense, there's kind of a generational handoff.
Yeah. And that's inherently meaningful. There's no way around it. When you have your own kids, your life has value, like meaning.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't feel it, like there's certainly people that have kids and still get depressed or something, but they're wrong. I mean, they have children. Like, there's something important happening there. Where the rest of us, we're making enough money, we're paying our rent, we're putting a little bit into a retirement account that we don't think is going to be there. We're going out drinking. We're trying to hook up on Tinder or hooking up on Tinder, each of which is equally miserable. I mean, a lot of people are entering into very successful relationships. A lot of people are getting married. A lot of people are having children. The percentage of people who aren't doing any of those things, we know it's growing. We know it's growing, and we know that's a disaster. Yeah. It's a disaster for the culture. It's a disaster for the country. It's a disaster for each individual person who lives a life that's so much more empty than it could have been.
Yeah.
The video games will be there when we're older, and the video games will be better when we're older.
Yeah.
The Netflix will be better when we're older. The HBO will we'll have 40 years of super high quality entertainment, but you only get to be young once.
Yeah.
You only get to find somebody who you want to have that, all other family structures aside, you only get to meet that person and have children with them and grow old with them once.
Yeah.
And if you miss that opportunity, it's devastating. It's devastating and it's sad. And I'm 32. My family ages well, so I've got a little bit of time, but I don't have all the time in the world. Yeah. So it's something that I worry about.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that strikes me as a pastor is that in many ways churches geared up and institutioned up. For example, Calvin College for the Christian Reformed Church was, in a sense, the Christian Reformed mating ground. My grandparents met in Christian school. My parents met at college. I met my wife at college. These institutions and norms, you had rules pertaining to sexual behavior. All of this was designed, in a sense, to yield the type of life transitions that would continue to facilitate this handoff from generation to generation that included a family structure and all of that. What's happened is that these, not only have these institutions have pretty much failed, been disrupted, and many of even those who were raised in church basically have, abandoned them for what's happened in the general population, which is a lot worse.
Yeah. And you see how hard I'm laughing, but there's two groups of people who have been able to avoid that fate. One of those is the expressly extremely religious Mormons. I talk about Mormons a lot in the group. I'm not Mormon. I have an affinity for them because they seem to be doing the culture thing very well for all of their other flaws.
Yep.
But Mormons are doing very, very conservative religious groups do that well. The other group of people that do that well is second or more, so legacy, people who go to elite institutions for college. So if you look at people whose parents made a lot of money, whose parents went to these important schools, the Ivy Leagues, the big names, the flagship state schools, and then their kids also went to those schools, those people, for some reason, I'm not saying it's a conspiracy, but it's a conspiracy. But those people, their children are finding mates in college and getting married in college. And then those people are linked to somebody who not only has a very similar family structure to they do, because they are legacy, second or third or more generations of high achieving people, and they're linked to another high achieving person.
That's right. And actually, in terms of a lot of the reading I've been doing on marriage for the last 10 years, the trend lines are two groups are going to wed. Those with a lot of money, because the economics then, the economic legal apparatus says, well, if you're living with someone, you're just an idiot. And the highly religious.
Yep.
And it's those two groups. And there's been in the country, marriage among the working class and the poor have simply cratered.
Yep.
And now increasingly the middle class, that in past generations, there was enough.
Well, and then the working class and the poor, even though they're not getting married, they're still having children. The middle class now is not getting married and not having children.
Right.
And there's devastating effects to not being married when you're having children. I'm not underscoring those at all. Right. But the effects on people who do neither, I worry. I worry that we're going to end up with a large, overeducated, lower, upper middle class of people with nothing in their lives. And that's not a good recipe for anything positive. So, that's...
Invest in healthcare and nursing homes, because there's not going to be, and psych meds and therapists.
Yeah.
Because I agree. That's
whoever's producing the medication that is technically not heroin, but is just heroin.
No, that's a, and again, I didn't have much of a window into that reality before the meetup started, and listening to, so James and I, are married in the group. We're kind of, James is about 10 years younger than I am. But James and I are sort of the married guys, but most of the group is either single, never married, or divorced. And this, I agree with you. And one of the things I've really learned is this is a social crisis, that it's, again, one of these social crises that is sort of a slow moving thing. It's in fact so slow that it's almost imperceptible. When it's among the poor and the working class who are in fact continuing to have children, those crises tend to be more obvious because children growing up in that sort of chaos, the culture then looks to things like schools to try to remediate those difficulties.
Well, and what have we just been talking about too? We've been talking about culture, and we've been talking about how certain cultures have avoided this. But what is American culture, especially 20th and 21st century American culture, if it's not the American middle class engine that powers everything?
Right.
And just what happens next? Do we turn into a country like Brazil, where the disparities even greater than we can imagine here, probably, where the racial disparities and the racial politics are even worse than they are here? Again, I don't know everything about Brazil, so I'm sure there's exceptions to this, but in general, that seems to be how it works down there. There's armed guards everywhere. There's gated communities everywhere. There's separation between two obvious classes of people, maybe more obvious classes, like more than two, but at least two. And that wasn't the American promise. That wasn't what we were promised as kids. That wasn't what we were told as kids. If we act like this is what we're going to get. And just moving to California, which it's supposed to be the most progressive place in the country. Like, California is supposed to be the place that had everything figured out. If it was just for all those goddamn Republicans in the middle of the country ruining everything, like, if it wasn't for them, everything would be fine. California is a solid blue state. I mean, it has some red aspects to it, and Republicans block some things, but I pay as much, like, I pay a lot of money for my apartment. I go outside, there's people sleeping in the streets. I go into my alley, there's human feces all over the place. Like, I can't walk to my gym that's 4 blocks away because the bridge that it goes under has been turned into a literal toilet. You can't even breathe. So I drive to a gym that's 4 blocks away to work out. Like, in the Midwest, I would have laughed at myself, but here it's just how it is.
Yeah.
And so that's how it works. So we live in the state with the most homeless population. Okay, well, maybe it's the weather. Well, we have the most income disparity. Well, maybe it's something else. Maybe it's, there's not enough housing. Well, we have the worst housing. Like, we don't build enough. Chicago, whenever there's a housing crisis, skyscrapers shoot up and there's no housing crisis in a year. We've had a perpetual housing crisis for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
We have the highest income disparity. Berkeley, like the most liberal place in the entire country. Largest discrepancy between black and white test scores. That's a big problem. If they're not able to solve the problem that all of these little tweaks and fixes are supposed to do, if they're not able to put all the money that they have into it and solve the problem, how is anyone else supposed to solve the problem? And that sounds horrible, but I think the answer, like, that sounds like an unsolvable problem, but I think that's because we're trying to solve things the wrong way. We're trying to solve things by making a better society that would produce better individuals. But the Jordan Peterson message, and the message that I've started to believe in, is that we need to make better individuals and the society will take care of itself. And
well, it is, my history has been working with the Black community, and many of the issues that we are now seeing in white communities, white middle class communities, are beginning to echo what we've seen generationally in the Black community. Now, obviously, the Black community in America had a long and horrible history, first of slavery, then of Jim Crow and discrimination, then the move up to the northern and western cities and their own brands of ghettoization and segregation. I mean, that was the focus of my father's ministry, and to a degree, my ministry here too. And the Black community certainly hasn't been able to solve some of the challenges that have faced them. And in fact, as a country, instead of seeing those situations get resolved, we've seen them spread into other ethnic groups, often interestingly enough, immigrants coming from places like Mexico and Latin America, and many of these immigrants not having those problems and actually coming and becoming some of our best citizens and becoming huge contributors to our society.
Well, and other groups going in the other direction.
Yeah.
And they're copying culturally the least successful by the measures that people talk about publicly, the least successful members of our society. But why does that happen? Like, we all know that the suicide rate is much higher in the white community than it is in the black community. So they are doing something. They're not worse off in every single measure. And they're not a monolith. So I spent a lot of time working in the South, and that's one of the things is almost no one from California has even been to the South. Like, they have no idea what's going on down there. I've had a disproportionate number of bosses and supervisors and managers that were African American. I've had a disproportionate number of bosses and managers and supervisors who are women. And I've had a disproportionate numbers of bosses and supervisors and managers who are LGBT. So, like, I've seen it all. And I'm a charismatic person. I'm a person that people can talk to, and I'm leaving quickly. So they tell me stuff that they probably shouldn't. And so, like, I've just experienced it. I've experienced that the black community is as diverse, and there's as many groups within the black community as there is in the white community. And some of those groups are doing much better than other groups, but we have to talk about them as a monolith. That's disrespectful towards Black African Americans as a community. That's disrespectful towards ourselves as people who we assume are capable of solving problems. We're not going to solve a problem if we are prejudiced against people and identify things as single groups, when we should be splitting them out even further to identify things that are good, like modes of being that are correct and modes of being that are incorrect or counterproductive to a certain goal, however you want to say it. Because again, I'm fully on board with the idea that no person is like an incorrect person. That kind of, I don't know. I have to hedge that, I feel like, for some reason, because I feel like I was coming off harsh. But everyone wants to improve everyone else's life generally. And so why are we doing it so poorly?
And I think your story in itself, you could see before your sabbatical, you could see, you got a decent education, you've had terrific career experiences, you're young, you're aging well, all of these things, but you had to, in a sense, pause and say, oh, I need to address things in my life. And it's that rather mysterious from the inside motivation and impetus that is it's not the only thing. And obviously, from all the videos I do about philosophy and everything, it's a rather mysterious thing, but that it's also an essential thing in terms of people deciding, okay, it's time for me to, I need to take care of my body. That means eating right. That means having discipline. I need some discipline with respect to, this gets into a lot of Christian stuff, but with respect to my desires. I can be destroyed by my desires, and we're now, as a function of our success, this hasn't been true of many, 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 probably most generations and most of the people who've ever lived. Yeah. As a function of our success and a function of our context, we can destroy ourselves fairly quickly and destroy our legacy by virtue of our desires running amok. And so suddenly we have to...
And our deference to them. So, like, we didn't just end up here. All of the people that I'm talking about that are having trouble, including myself, had parents. A lot of us had very good parents. Yeah. But something happened culturally. It got too easy. My parents didn't really worry about me not being able to find a job. They didn't really worry about me not being particularly motivated because I was passing all the tests. I was getting through all of the hurdles because the hurdles got so easy. But when they were younger, they saw, if you get a high school education, you'll get a job. If you get a college education, you'll get a good job. If you get either, you'll get a house. That's how it worked. It was so easy. Like, it worked so well that we lost track of the fact that it doesn't work anymore. Yeah. And if I copied the way my dad did things, my family does very well for themselves. They're very comfortable. They take care of my sister who lives at home. Like my sister has special needs. She lives at home, but the three of them are doing fantastic. Like they're set. When I have kids, it's going to be a whole nother story. My income stream is going to be all over the place. I'll have years where I make quadruple what I'm going to make, and then I'll make nothing for 3 years. That's going to be difficult to figure out. Yeah. A house is going to be a lot harder for me to afford. It's going to be a lot harder to keep once I afford it, because I'll be asked to move around. I can work online anywhere, but I'm going to be asked to move so that I can be somewhere in person. Is that good? Is that bad? I don't know. But like, it's a wild set of things. And so something I've been talking about with a lot of my friends, like the discussion groups that we've had, and then these are more younger people, or more. And for the record, I'm 32, so like about 30. That's probably about the average age of people that are coming to the discussion groups I host. We've talked about it as taking the crown. Essentially, is our grandparents fought so hard, like in the war, in the Great Depression. They got through all of these hard things, even though the technology at the time maybe didn't call for those things. Like there didn't need to be a Great Depression. There didn't need to be a war, but it happened. They fought through it. They set up everything so that it would, quote, never happen again. And then it got too easy. And that's not to say that people didn't work hard. They did, but the tracks got too set. The struggle didn't feel immediate enough. People weren't scared. So they didn't set things up to keep going. So now we have a bunch of boomers who didn't take responsibility for the stewardship of the culture that that all these things are based on, and they're not holding on to the crown. And we have millennials that didn't even know that the crown exists. And so now I'm telling my friends that we need to go out. We need to take that crown, that mantle, that leadership, whatever you want to call it. And we need to build stuff for ourselves. We need to build new stuff that's never been built before. We need to build new organizations, new ways of communicating, new ways of supporting each other, new ways of supporting our lifestyles. And it's going to be very strange, and it's going to be very hard, and it's going to be very disruptive. But it'll be exciting, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're right about that. I've never heard you kind of put it that way before, and I think that's helpful. Part of it is, so I pastor a small, dying, aging congregation. Well, yeah. The building, and I mean, the building is just kind of the external thing. The institution, and institutions aren't really things. Institutions are these, shared mental things. I mean, marriage is an institution. It gets expressed in behavior, and it gets expressed in symbols like rings. Churches are institutions, and they get expressed in buildings and meetings.
Collectivized agreement. Yeah,
that's right. And so, one of the things that I've seen is, especially in places like California, immigrant groups are investing in institutions. And when, 100 years ago or so, when Dutch immigrants came to America, these people made far less money than we do. And they built churches, and they built schools, and they had this vision of building. And so then the following generations were blessed by those institutions. But the amount of disruption and, like you described, people moving all over. I live across the continent from my mother and my sister. I mean, there's been so much change and dislocation that I think you're right, and that we don't even know quite what we need to build. And for me, on one hand, I've got this church, and I don't remember if it was you or somebody else at the meetup asked me one day, well, what happens when we have more people coming to the meetup than you have coming to church? And I thought, yeah, that's a really good question, and I'm not sure what it means.
What happens when the meetup group starts out donating to people that go to the church?
Yeah. And so, all of these questions are out there. And I mean, the meetup is a year and a half old, and we're still trying to figure out what it is and what we're doing, and what kinds of practices and institutions within it to create, so that, so no, it's a big deal. we should probably wrap this up.
Well, I just, on the note of the church, I think I think both the church and the group have been very lucky that it is a Jordan Peterson based group, because I think everyone within the Jordan Peterson group is incredibly respectful of the church, and we want to help in any way we can, and we want to support the church in any way we can, and the people that are in it, even though we've never met most of them, but they let us use their building, and we're so appreciative of it that, like, we're gonna try and do whatever. Well, I won't say whatever we can, but we're gonna try and do whatever we can reasonably do to help the church continue. Outside of that, to wrap up, I don't have anything specific.
Well, we will talk again. I've got some,
Sure.
I've been wanting to get Joey online for a while, and I've actually got some topics that I think we might do some conversations with. We'll probably bring James back and probably
Fantastic.
another member or two, and because there are sometimes some things I want to talk about, because I listen in the meetup and I hear ideas and it's like, I can't say it like you guys say it, and you guys have more authority to say it because you're living it. And so, but I think what you just described, I've heard loud and clear, and I've watched happen. And I don't see, right now the culture is, we've been fighting over Trump. And now we've got we're going to have a Democratic primary for the next while. And we've got climate change and immigration. And we've got all of these things that we're fighting over. But the kinds of things that you've described to me are very important things for our society to wrestle with, because these things actually threaten so much of what has made, I lived overseas for a while, and when I returned from the Dominican Republic, I had a much deeper appreciation for a bunch of these things that America has, which are these institutions that have afforded so much of the blessings that we have, but these institutions aren't easy to describe. They're encoded and Jordan Peterson talks about this well, they're encoded in our action. We can kind of represent them in speech, but these things are above us and beyond us. And
what was the term "wrestle with God"? What was that? That's a Jordan Peterson term. Well, not a Jordan Peterson. It's a much older term than that, but it's one he's repeated often. The wrestle with, is that Israel or what?
That's when Jacob wrestles with God, when basically Jacob has his back to the wall, and God's, all along God has been saying he's going to bless him, and Jacob all along has been saying, well, sort of on my terms. And so when everything is on the line, God shows up and say, all right, you want to take me on? Let's do it. And they fight, and Jacob won't let him go until he blesses him, and God basically touches his hip, and cripples him, which means that now that's right. The last thing that Jacob could rely on in order to get away from Esau, which would be to run away from him, now Jacob can't even do that. And in a sense, God is saying, now will you trust me? And of course, Esau comes, and it doesn't unfold as Jacob fears. And, so these things we wrestle with are beyond us. But as Peterson says, this is what Israel means to wrestle with God.
But let's take that a step further. In wrestling with it, we don't actually have to solve all the problems. All the politicians want to talk as if we're just going to solve this problem. We're going to move the money here, and then the problem will be over. And I'm going to be the one that saved everybody. But no, it's the act of wrestling with the problems themselves will make us all individually stronger and better people. And then we will be the kind of people where these problems just get better on their own. We don't get to be the individual hero that is going to get all the acclaims and is going to get all the awards and is going to get the office and stuff like that. Like, it's just that's not going to be how we solve the problems that are coming. We're going to solve the problems that are coming by being honest with them, by wrestling with them, and by more Jordan Peterson terminology, like confronting them forthrightly and with courage. And
also individually and together. I mean, it's both and, because we can, I mean, that's the complex dance of this, which is you can do all kinds of things to, let's say, outcompete the crowd, but that doesn't rescue the society from the two-tiered society, which, again, I lived in the Dominican Republic, tiny little overclass and huge underclass where you have to have guards everywhere because, I mean, this is not what we want as a country.
No, it's not what anyone wants. It's not even really what the overclass wants.
No, not at all. And America has had, well, and yeah, it's complicated to talk about, but this is, anyway.
But the other point of that story was I was being a coward about this. You've been asking me to come on to this show, like for over a year, you've been asking me. And I've been saying no. And it's literally because I was being cowardly. I was worried something might go wrong. I might say something that puts me in jeopardy in the future. And, I've had some things happen to me recently that we've discussed. I'm not going to discuss them on the podcast, but I've decided I'm not going to be a coward anymore. And I'm going to confront these things. And so, Paul, I will wrestle with these problems with you. I will wrestle with these problems with whoever wants to tap in with us. And we'll see where it takes us. And we'll just, I guess, trust.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Joey. This has been great. I will send this to you, and I know you want me to share it, and I will. And I look forward to, some more conversations. Like I said, I've got some ideas in my head, and you'll be getting some emails from me about some other conversations, because this, and we don't even have a name for it. It's the problem of the generational handoff. This is a big deal, and I think it's something we need to talk about. So, anyway, thank you, Joey. I'm going to stop recording. What's that?
Thank you.
I'll stop recording, so just hang on.